Call the March planning for August the 9th to order at 7 o'clock. Please get to the rise for the
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Chair King,
here.
Vice Chair Labonte. Here. Commissioner House, Commissioner Miller,
Here.
Commissioner Nettenkamp,
Here.
Commissioner Van Domelen, Commissioner Ken Odell. I think he's online.
Did you get that?
There you are. Thank you.
And
Ex officio Counselor Wood Kendall.
here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Item number 5 is public comments. This time is for anyone in the audience or on the Zoom to bring up comments about planning commission business that is not on the Zoom. Is there anyone?
Hands up.
Hearing or seeing none, move on to item number 6 is the approval of the minute for July 12th, 2023. Has everyone read those? Any changes? I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve the regular session minutes of July 12th.
A second. Then moved by Commissioner Labonte, second by Commissioner Nunn-Camp for approval of the July 12th minutes as presented. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That's approved. Okay, item number 7 is public hearing. We have 2 public hearings. These are legislative. So we'll be making recommendations to the city council. Just clarification before we start. We have both of them have the same file number. CPA 23-056 subsection 2, and the other one is subsection 1. Just could we get a brief description of why they're separate file?
Yeah, absolutely. The reason that we're doing it this way is because the H&A document is essentially part of the overall file for the UGB proposal. And in an effort to have both hearings tonight on these topics, we needed to have a 1 and a 2 file number for them because again, they're part of the same record. We couldn't create a new file for the H&A. So that's why you see 1 and 2 for the different issues tonight.
So we'll just refer to them as the file number then for the additional 2.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, if I could get to the description of the public hearing process.
Thank you, Chair King. The North Plains Planning Commission will conduct a legislative public hearing on City File CPA 23-056 (2), updating the housing needs analysis. The order of business will be as follows. The chair will open the public hearing and request the staff presentation. The public then will be invited to provide testimony on the proposed amendment. The order of testimony will be: first, those who support the proposal; second, those who oppose the proposal; and third, neutral testimony. Staff responses to the testimony, if any, will then be presented. The chair will call for commission comments and discussion. The chair will close the public hearing or continue the hearing to a date certain. The commission members may ask questions of staff or a witness at any time. Everyone who testifies is deemed to be party to the proceeding and must provide their name and full mailing address. Parties will be notified of the decision, continuances, appeals, or other procedural actions required by the city code and state law. Please speak clearly into the microphone. The criteria for this matter include the applicable provisions of state law and the relevant in the city code. Those criteria and findings of fact are described in the staff report and supplemental staff report. Your testimony should address those criteria, findings, or other city or state land use standards you believe apply to this proposal. Due to the number of people here this evening, testimony will be limited to 3 minutes per person.
Thank you. Going to open the public hearing at 7:05 for city file number CPA 23-056 subsection 2, which is the housing needs analysis. If I could, okay, just clarification, because this is legislative, we don't have any ex parte, but what about any potential bias that may, or conflicts of interest that may arise from commissioners?
I believe it would be good to ask the commission if they do have any conflicts of interest that could preclude them from being able to hear the matter tonight.
Are there any commissioners?
Yes. I need to resume myself.
Okay, if you would step down. Anyone else?
Chair King,
Yes,
for the record, could we get a reasoning of why Commissioner Van Dalen needs to recuse himself? Just for the record, why is it you need to, I heard an attorney was.
Yeah, if you could just mention a little bit about the conflict that you have.
Well, the property that you're kind of looking at is my property, so.
Okay, so you own property in the study area of this. Okay, thanks.
Just for a point of order, though, that housing needs analysis may be okay.
well,
No,
there's the understanding that they go hand in hand.
Okay,
And
gotcha.
so it's best if he's
Okay.
gonna step down
Great.
from the other one, he should step down.
got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Should have asked that sooner. Apologies.
Anyone else?
Read up, Mike.
Could I please get the staff report and your testimony and recommendation?
Yeah, thank you, Chair King. Just a couple things I want to acknowledge real quickly, and then we have some other representatives here for the city that will provide the staff report. In far as the sample motions that were provided for the H&A, I just want to clarify that you're not recommending a motion on the ordinances. You are recommending a motion on the city file number. So for the first one here, it'll be a recommendation on file number CPA 22-056 number 2. And then when you get over to the UGB, I'll make that same comment because we have the incorrect reference there for the ordinance. And then there was a error on page 13 of the staff report, but I will let our consultant address that matter. So with that, I will turn it over to our representatives here who are working with us today.
All right, so then we are, just to clarify, we're the applicant.
Pardon?
Or is this the applicant making testimony?
This is the applicant making testimony,
So
correct?
this is- okay.
Yeah. This is the applicant's team. Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve, and thank you, Chair King. On behalf of the city, Heather Austin with 3J Consulting, here to present the staff report for the housing needs analysis to begin this evening's public hearings. It is titled number 2 versus the UGB, which is titled number 1. However, it's important to talk about the H&A first because it does establish the land need for residential growth in the UGB area. So it's one of the legs of the stool upon which the UGB analysis sits, if you will. So we'll start with the H&A and then move on to the UGB this evening. In your packet this evening, you had this. This is the wrong slideshow.
There's a lot. How's that?
There we go. Yes, let's start there. So in the packet this evening, you had a updated 2022 City of North Plains housing needs analysis. This is an update to the 2017 housing needs analysis that this group recommended approval to the city council, and city council did adopt. This evening, we are looking at very similar analysis, not a lot of change to how the analysis was done, but updating the numbers, which I'll explain on the next slide. So why this update? Well, the city of North Plains, in order to update the urban growth boundary, we are required to use the most recent consolidated population forecast that's put forth by Portland State University Population Research Center. And that happens every 4 years. And so in 2020, that was done for Washington County. Our population estimate did change a bit, and what really changed in some way was our population forecast, how we were going to grow. And so what we needed to do was go through the housing needs analysis that we had from 2017 and update the numbers basically in all of the tables and make sure that it was reflective of the growth estimate as well as the current population estimate for the city. So that is where the update comes from. Next slide, please. So as I said, the 2022 HNA is an update to the 2017 HNA. Same analysis and methodologies were used. Those were approved by the city, adopted by the city, accepted by the state. So those have been in place for 5 years. The 2017 did not obviously use the 2020 base numbers for the forecast, but it also did not include full build out of Sunset Ridge and full approval for the build out of Brindle. So we do know a little more in 2023 or in 2022 when this document was written than we did in 2017. So we don't need to make as many guesses about how much neighborhood community development would occur because now we know it either built out or was approved in that time frame. So we can move forward with reasonable accuracy on how those lands look regarding density and type of housing. Next, please. So there are a few key findings that we take out of our housing needs analysis, and this is a repeat slide from the last hearing, but it's important to go over this information in case anyone didn't get a chance to see it. The key findings from the HNA are that North Plains must provide the opportunity for development of a wide range of housing types. So in the past, we've had primarily single family detached housing. In the last HNA, we had 88% was the number of single family detached homes. We did find that there's a need to change that a bit. So we'll talk about that on the next slide. But for this slide, what's important is there was 1,348 dwelling units that would be needed between now and 2042. The capacity within the city at the time that this was written, so 558, but that takes out the 507 at Brindle. So we need to find 790 dwelling units in our new UGB area. And in order to do that, some certain parameters were put as far as density, and that would result in 167.4 acres to accommodate residential land needs, and that is for the UGB expansion. Next slide, please. So how were those numbers come to? How did 167 acres become the number? Well, we looked at of the current city, the way the city has developed over time, as well as where the city wants to grow. 7.1 dwelling units per acre became an appropriate number for North Plains, given the lack of transit, the community vision, and recently adopted land use efficiency measures that this group saw in 2022. The HNA assumes a future split of 70% single family detached, and then a combination of 30% single family attached and multifamily. So the city is recognizing that it has needed housing types that are separate from single family detached, but also recognizing that that will still be the predominant housing style in the city moving forward. The land need number does include housing infrastructure like roads and parkland, but it does not include any school land, as the school district did not identify a need in the 20-year planning horizon. Next slide, please. So with that, the staff report in your packet does include findings of fact demonstrating compliance with the applicable city and state regulations. Steve mentioned that on page 13 of the packet, page 5 of the HNA staff report, it does state that we're showing the city's residential land need through 2024, but it should say 2042. So apologies for flipping that 4 and that 2. It makes a huge difference. We're not talking about the next year. We're talking about the next about 20 years. So with that, staff would recommend the planning commission recommend approval of the file number rather than the ordinance to the city council, their public hearing on September 5th, 2023. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions of the staff report or the application? Okay, or any other presentation?
That's it for the presentation.
Okay, so are there any proponents who wish to speak in favor of? Hearing none, seeing none? Laura?
Any hands up?
I don't have it to see. I'm sorry.
So if there's folks online that want to speak to the housing needs analysis, the urban growth boundary comes second. If you want to speak to the housing needs analysis, this is the chance. And it looks like Ryan, would you like to do so? Ryan?
In favor of.
Yeah, I'm speaking on behalf of the Van Domelen family, and we would like to speak in favor of this. Our family legacy has been providing delicious milk since the Great Recession, and our family farm has not been operating in a major capacity. We are a working family, a family of school lunch ladies, Intel workers, grocery workers, and nurses, and we understand that we are facing a severe housing shortage, and like many working families, we are just being deeply affected by this. We would like to see, more housing to support working families. And so we support this update.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Any other proponent? Any?
We just speak up in the audience. If you want us to-
Microphone up here.
Chair King, would you like me to provide some simple instructions for the testimony?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I didn't have the chance to say each speaker would be provided 3 minutes. And when it comes to that time, we'll put a timer on the screen so folks in the room and those online can see that. And if you're in the room, we do ask that you go to the podium and we have a microphone there to use. That's the end of my
All right.
spiel.
Proponent. Please come forward. And everyone that's testifying needs to state their name and address for the record, please.
Stuart, if you're a proponent of both UGB and housing needs analysis, you talk on each issue and you get 3
You
minutes.
can,
on each
yes.
issue?
Yeah.
Okay, Don Maltese, 4811 Savoy, UPOIS Drive, Vancouver, Washington. I'm in favor of the housing needs analysis. First thing I'd like to do is to thank the planning commission, the city council, and all the work that's been done on the part of the staff. Not only this city council and planning staff, but I've been doing this or standing up here from time to time over the 10 to 30 years, talking on the same issue. So the previous city councils and planning commission deserve a debt of gratitude as well. The reason that we're here today, I think, is because this area has been designated urban reserve. It was over 10 years ago. And since that time, there have been scores of meetings that we've all sat through, or most of us sat through, or concerned citizens anyhow have sat through. The properties, all the properties under consideration have taken this into consideration and done a lot of work. The housing needs analysis makes sense. Right now, we have shortage of housing. The longer it goes on, the more expensive that housing gets built. Why are we doing it today? I just mentioned we're urban land. It's urban reserve land. It's made for this type of growth. The people in, it was mentioned Sunset Ridge, they bought there and it was developed the way it is because of future growth. And the roads are stubbed to the south. Parks are half built. There's a trail system that from David Hatcher days and before that along McKay Creek was going to be built. Connectivity to the city. All this is driven by the fact that we have to have people living out there, tax revenue for us. So I think this extension will finish the parks that are out there. It'll create an atmosphere of people that they can walk to the school. We were involved in giving the land to the school or working with the school. And the reason it's out there is not because they didn't want to be around children. They went out there because the Van Domelen properties and others were supposed to develop so kids could walk to school, ride their bikes to school, and enjoy the parks out there. And the citizens of Sunset Ridge deserve this. I mean, the whole city deserves it. And so we can finalize some of these plans that we put together. The land out there is definitely buildable. It's flat. You don't have to be a contractor, and I'm not one, or a developer, and I'm not one of those either, to know that it's better to build on flat than side hill. The utilities are all stubbed out there. Clean Water Services years ago created the size of pipes out there to service the area. The water is out there. There's talk about a loop system water for safety for the whole city. So it's not just being selfish to deliver this land just for my land or other folks' land out there. It's to save the city from problems down the hill relative to water availability. the term, I think, Rudy did a wonderful job of explaining smart growth over the years, and I think this defines it. It really does. I mean, we've got a city that's got Sunset Ridge out on one corner, and it's got an infill situation that they have to fill in. This infill will be what? Create housing to people. I'm talking about that. Is that the overall? And that was a wonderful guy, and you should follow it.
Are there any questions?
Oh, sorry.
Testimony?
It is, it's on and, yeah.
All right, am I done?
Yep.
Thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Any other proponent testifying in favor? Yes. Please come forward. Troy Van Raven. 950 West.
Van Reagan.
In favor of it, I'm very impressed with what the city is. The process the city is going through. It's my belief that this will reach or accomplish a goal that's been in the works for a long time. And so, always, any questions or testimony? Extra? Any other proponents? Yes. Please come forward.
Hello. My name is Deborah Van Raven Davis. I am in favor and agree with the report. Kids 30-something who have trouble finding housing, and I know that housing is critical. So I very much hope that it does both this year and finish the plan, and our kids get to work and live in this area. Thank you.
Any questions for the testimony? Hearing nothing, thank you.
Thank you.
The other proponents, wishing to testify in favor of?
My name is Scott Van Raden, 15840 Northwest Wind Hill Drive in Banks. I also would applaud the city council and the process that you guys are going through on our behalf. I also have kids and grandkids that live and work in this area. And believe me, it's a real problem to find housing. It's a real problem also to live in Banks and know how far I have to drive all the time just to go to a grocery store. It's a great waste of time, energy, money, fuel, etc. So I'm all for it.
Any questions of the testimony? Thank you, sir. Any other proponents? Are there any opponents? People wishing to testify again?
Chair King, members of the commission, for the record, my name is Nellie McAdams. My address is on the card that I submitted. I want to thank you for hearing testimony today. I'm going to be giving testimony not only on the file number, but also on the ordinance. Because the original hearing on this ordinance was not properly noticed, that decision has been remanded, so the entire decision should be up for vote procedurally. So my testimony regarding ordinance 489 is that I urge the commission to reject the housing needs analysis, as it does far too little to look inside the city for housing. And it sets densities at levels that will not meet the city's affordable housing goals or achieve the revenue that the city wants. The draft HNA states that low density and single family detached dwellings are expensive for a city to service. They're also the most expensive to buy.
The HNA also states that the city has a severe shortage of affordable housing, which you heard testimony on today. And that is primarily because 88% of North Plains is single-family residential detached, compared to about 61% for the rest of Washington County. Yet the new plan would allow all new housing, not including rental, to be built at 70% single-family detached, bringing the total down to just 80%. Looking inward to build and revitalize would not only mitigate the sprawl and waste of agricultural and natural resources, but also minimize the expense of providing infrastructure to homes and businesses. Then expanded by 2,000 acres in 2016, and only 10% of that has been built because the transportation infrastructure alone would cost $101 million. It is far cheaper to provide infrastructure within city limits than it is to provide it on fresh land. The city also did not sufficiently explore land that is, so as an example, the city dismissed several important housing efficiency measures that would have allowed for increased density and mixed-use commercial residential zoning. It should be noted that 7.1 homes per acre is just a continuation of the bedroom community structure that the city is trying to move away from. This type of density these types of measures would have addressed the city's acknowledged lack of affordable housing, the net negative cost of providing services, and protected farmland for development. For these reasons, I urge you to reject the HMA and consider smart and comprehensive policies to meet housing needs at all levels and minimize the city's footprint and cost of services. And I would like to clarify from prior testimony that the land in the subject area is not an urban reserve. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions of the testimony? So the staff is the opponent. Is there any questions that you want to address with product?
Yes, please. Wait till all the testimony's done. We'll wait till all the testimony's done.
Okay. Any other opponents testify against? Yes. Yeah.
Mine is kind of all together, so I'm gonna try to separate this. Yep, my name is Katie Miller. My address is on the card I provided. I live just outside city limits, so I think in terms of housing, I just would like to see a little bit more dense housing. Before I bought my property here with my husband, I owned a condo in Beaverton, and it's all that I could afford. When you're starting off and you can't afford a $500,000 property, you need something at a lower price point. So I got my condo for $180,000, and 2 years later, it went up substantially, and then I could afford to buy something bigger. But I think what we're missing here is people like recent college graduates, people who don't want a yard. There needs to be some sort of option at a lower price point, because otherwise, you know, small families are going to get priced out, and you know, I guess that's all I have to say about the housing part.
Any questions of the testimony? All right, thank you. There any other opponents?
Hey, this is Meredith Hart. I live in North Plains. I'm about 10 minutes up Pumpkin Ridge. Excuse me?
Address, please.
20294 Northwest Keller Road.
Yep.
Okay, so I know there's a huge development that's being created over, it's Lennar, I guess, off of the main area of North Plains, the town center. And I'm questioning, they haven't even completed all of the development there. So are we still in a deficit of housing without that being completed? That's my first question. So let's start there.
So go ahead and testify, and then we'll have the staff respond. Complete your testimony, and then we'll have staff respond.
Okay. Actually, I'll just end there. Let's respond to that, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the testimony? All right, thank you. There any other opponents? Hearing none, is there anyone else wishing to testify neutrally, either for or against? Hearing none, if staff would want to reply to any of the opponent's concerns.
Thank you, Chair King. If you don't mind, I'll jump in first and then you can add to it. I just wanted to respond to a couple of the comments regarding land use efficiency measures and density and city looking within city limits. So in order to proceed with the UGB process, the city is required to look at land use efficiency measures, and the state does provide great, resources about how you do that. And so this board probably remembers, I think everybody was here going through that process and really thoughtfully deciding for North Plains, what are the appropriate land use efficiency measures. And so you made strides like removing new single family detached homes from your R2.5 zoning district. You allow duplexes and triplexes in your R5 as well as townhomes without having to go through a type review process that permitted outright. So a lot of those changes were made. As far as looking within the city limits, we did do that. And in the housing needs analysis, it identifies 2.2 acres of our 2.5 land available for vacant or redevelopable. And your planning director Miller told me today, an acre of that is under development now. It's in for application. So we're really looking at 1.2 acres of our 2.5 lands. The majority of land in the city is developed without redevelopment potential. So that's where we are as far as being able to look within. I agree that infrastructure is better where you can serve it closely, and that's why when we get to the UGB, we'll talk about those issues too. As far as the question about Bryn Hill not being complete and our need, Bryn Hill was part of the 2001 UGB expansion, which lasted, was the planning horizon for 20 years. So from 2001 to 2021, the development in Bryn Hill was counted in. Those housing units were part of that last version. So now here we are in 2023, looking for the next 20 years. So those units were accounted for. They are now being built out. There was the recession from 2008 till about 2013 that slowed development and some changes to annexation laws in the state, which did mean a lot of the housing in Sunset Ridge and Bryn Hill came quickly, but had it spread out over the entire 20-year horizon, that was the plan. So now we're looking to the next 20 years, and there is a need for 790 more housing units. Don't you have more to add to that?
Okay, thank you. Any questions of the staff? Follow up? Heather or Bill, could you address the question as to whether it is or is not the considered urban reserve?
Commissioner Miller, yes, I can. And in fact, in the next portion of the meeting, UGB, I'll go into it in depth actually. But the lands around North Plains that are being considered for UGB expansion are undesignated. They are neither rural reserves nor urban reserves.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I ask a question from Zoom? Is that possible?
Go ahead.
Okay, my name's Kitty Evers. I am in next door to you in Helvetia in 13987 Northwest Logie Trail. Why was a decision made to do this without notifying the people of North Plains?
I'll respond to that. I'm Chris Crane, the city attorney. As the planning commissioners know, this is the second time you've had this presentation made to you. You did recommend approval last time. The reason we're doing it again is because for this kind of legislative decision, your code requires mailed notice to every property owner within 250 feet of the proposed expansion area, which was done both last time and again this time. It also requires publication in a local newspaper. We didn't do that last time. I mean, I don't know how many people still get their news from the local newspaper, but on the chance that somebody did not get it, because that's where they get their notice, we pulled the decision back, rescheduled it for a planning commission hearing, provided written notice again to all to property owners within 250 feet of the expansion area, and this time published the notice in the newspaper. So notice has been provided to the residents inside and outside the city, according to the city code, twice now.
Thank you. Any questions of the follow-up from staff? Okay, is there anyone else wishing to testify? Hearing none, seeing none.
I have one more, sorry. Meredy Hart again. Just wondering how, if you approve more housing, how that changes the development of roads, transportation around North Plains. It's pretty tough as it is right now.
Thank you for the question. This is Bill Reed, Finance Director for the city. With UGB expansion, the city will be required to do comprehensive planning of those lands brought into the urban growth boundary. And that will include zoning. It will also include planning infrastructure where streets, roads, water, all of that goes. And that process actually begins this fall in cooperation with Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development and Oregon Department of Transportation. So all land brought in must be planned out, including roads for circulation and freight and all of that. So that comes next, actually. So thank you for your question.
Thank you. Any questions to follow up on that? No. Anyone else wishing to testify? Any discussion from the planning commission? Hearing none. Close the public hearing at 7:37. I'll follow up with questions of staff. I'll entertain a motion. This will be in the form of a recommendation to city council. And are we date certain, or are we just leaving that open?
September 5th.
September 5th. Okay. Please include that in any motion.
Move to recommend the city council approve updating housing needs analysis. City file CPA 23-056. Date of the city council meeting will be September 5th.
Someone's whispering.
All right, the motion is for a recommendation for approval to city council on file number CPA 23-0562, housing needs analysis update. Moved by Commissioner Mellencamp, second by Commissioner Bonte. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. All right, we'll move on to public hearing B, which will be also legislative, which we'll be making recommendations to the council. This is on the file numbers CPA 23-0561, urban growth boundary expansion. Could I please get the process for the public hearing?
Thank you, Chair King. The North Plains Planning Commission will conduct a legislative public hearing on city file CPA 23-056 (1) North Plains Urban Growth Boundary Amendment and Comprehensive Plan Text Amendment. The order of business will be as follows. The chair will open the public hearing and request the staff presentation. The public then will be invited to provide testimony on the proposed amendment. The order of the testimony will be first, those who support the proposal, second, those who oppose the proposal, and third, any neutral testimony. Staff responses to the testimony, if any, will then be presented. The chair will call for commission comments and discussion. The chair will close the public hearing or continue the hearing to a date certain. The commission members may ask questions of staff or a witness at any time. Everyone who testifies is deemed to be party to the proceeding and must provide their name and full mailing address. Parties will be notified of the decision, continuances, appeals, or other procedural actions required by the city code and state law. Please speak clearly into the microphone. The criteria for this matter include the applicable provisions of state law and the relevant standards in the city code. Those criteria and findings of fact are described in the staff report and supplemental staff report. Your testimony should address those criteria and findings or other city or state land use standards you believe apply to the proposal. Due to the number of people here tonight, testimony will be limited to 3 minutes per person.
All right, thank you. We will open the public hearing at 7:41 for city file number CPA 23-0561, urban growth boundary expansion. If I could please get the staff report.
Thank you, Chair King. Wendy is on the presentation now. Again, my name is Bill Reed. I'm the finance director for the city of North Plains, and I'll be walking through the information for you to consider as part of staff report to you all. And you can go ahead and advance this. So tonight I'm just going to walk through, we staff as a group will walk through some items here, 5 items in this order. First, we want to recognize some comments we received previously about the urban growth boundary expansion ordinance during the recommendation and ordinance process. So we want to go back over some of that and address some of those prior comments and themes. The second thing is that we will be providing kind of more formal staff report with some supplemental findings that augment or add to the existing record and the previous decision that was made prior to this new hearings process. So that will come next. We'll then give kind of a brief discussion about the Senate Bill 4 semiconductor UGB expansion issue. There seems to be some confusion or conflation about that, so we'll say a little bit about that. Then I will get the microphone back and discuss undesignated lands and rural reserves and context for this UGB expansion. And then we'll just kind of give you a schedule for the process moving forward after that for your consideration. So just comments generally, again, these were kind of buckets of comments that we got in favor. Generally, we got comments that there was support for helping the city balance its fiscal sustainability as well as grow an economy here. I think the city is lacking an economy, and so expanding it for jobs nearby, that was the nature of comment, and supporting the expansion for that. We got testimony from property owners outside of the UGB to the east, but proposed to be brought in to the urban growth boundary. And we got property owners to the north of the city, existing UGB, that a support being brought in, and all of the above commended the process that the city went through regarding that. We got comment externally about the UGB expansion, commending the UGB expansion and supporting it in support of the state's semiconductor industry, as well as advanced manufacturing and some other important industries. And then we did get positive comment and support about the fact that the city is expanding to bring in housing, much needed housing to support city housing as well as workforce housing for the county. In terms of comment against, we did get comments, and we even heard this evening to the effect of PC hearing, communication notice of the PC hearing, previous PC hearing in May, not getting proper newspaper notice. And the response to city council rescinded the two ordinances 489 and 490, specifically here about the urban growth boundary. And this planning commission has opened up a new hearings process. So going about that is in remedy of that situation. The second comment we got, and the city attorney, Chris Green, already, but that is that some people commented well outside the city study area, but in Washington County mostly, commented that they weren't aware of the UGB expansion process, they weren't noticed. And as was noted, city ordinance requires that notice be given to property owners within 250 feet of an urban growth boundary expansion area. And so if folks weren't noticed, that is because why? And in the eyes of the law, somebody who lives outside of our notice area is no different from somebody, or in Hillsborough, for instance, is no different under the eyes of the law than somebody who lives in John Day or Medford for that matter. I mean, we notice to our responsibility. And so we just wanted to be clear about that. Expansion area, this was a common theme. The expansion is going on to potentially highest quality soil for agriculture in Washington County. Impacts to farming were not adequately addressed by the urban growth expansion report, and farmland is going to be lost. We actually have some supplemental information in the staff report, and there will be conversation or discussion about that specifically very soon. But I want to point out, and I'll get into it a bit later, and that is that House Bill 4078, which established urban reserves in Washington County, well, in the Portland metro region, but also specifically in Washington County. And land that is around North Plains that's undesignated was not protected for agricultural, permanent protection for agriculture, as opposed to about 150,000 acres that has been permanently protected. And so the land around us that's undesignated was set aside for North Plains to consider future urbanization. So it is appropriate under urban reserves law for North Plains to consider these areas. On the issue of semiconductor, SB4 and UGB expansion, there were comment about that being intertied or related to our UGB expansion that we're planning ourselves, the city. We'll address that confusion a little bit later. And then finally, we got comment about irrigation district easements being encroached upon or potentially trespassed. And there was legal review of that. And we don't expect there to be any major issues regarding easements. They can be moved. There's a process for that. Development is not going to be substantial in affecting some of the easements. And that issue can be resolved. It's not it isn't a difficult problem or a problem. So that is a summary of what we heard in opposition. And then there were some comments on the next page that have to do with neutral testimony that we got. And the questions were raised about is North Plains adequately planned its infrastructure for this UGB expansion as part of the UGB expansion decision. And Oregon law does not require a city of our size to plan infrastructure for an urban expansion area, urban growth boundary expansion area, before that expansion happens. For a city our size, we do that during and after, with comprehensive planning and infrastructure planning. So we don't have to do infrastructure planning before a UGB decision. And so we're following the proper course of order for all of this. Oops, sorry. Okay, so this begins, I believe I handed over to Heather, so go for it.
That's right. Thank you, Bill. It's my portion of the show this evening to just recap what we talked about at the previous public hearings to make sure that anyone who didn't get a chance to participate or see these materials has now had a chance to do that. So as a reminder, what Bill just said, we did not remove anything from the report as far as the findings. There's a July 2023 date on the UGB expansion report because a couple of the maps were updated to just for clarity. The SB4 materials were separated that Chris will speak to in a few minutes, but all of the findings and the report itself remain part of the proposal in addition to the materials that we provided you. So we're not looking to make any changes to the substance of the recommendation this evening. And that goes for both the urban growth boundary expansion report and the comprehensive plan updates that go along with it. So next slide, please. So just as a recap of the process, in order to determine what the UGB expansion should look like, we had to start with establishing a study area. The red dashed line here on your screen is 1 mile from the existing UGB. That is not the study area. However, as you can see, the study area is in the light green preliminary study area because those are the undesignated lands. So anything in gray showing up on your screen is not available to us to look at because it is a rural reserve. The dashed area south of Highway 26, I have a pointer, maybe Andy, you can follow me on the screen for those, yeah. Is in the Air Acres airstrip, and the covenants and restrictions of those properties precludes them from redeveloping in this 20-year planning horizon. But everything to the east of those areas and south of 26, that's light green, I'm sorry for the not being very distinguishable, yes, thank you, is included in the recommended area. And anything south of 26 that's in the light green of the dashed is considered our exception lands, and we'll get to that in a second, but those are the first areas that we looked at by requirement, and then everything else in light green came next. Let's make sure I heard that. Yep, next slide, please. So how we established how much need we have in our urban growth boundary. It's sort of a three-legged stool, although 2 are pluses and 1 is a minus. We look at the economic opportunities analysis. It was adopted in 2022, was submitted to DLCD. It had the approval to move forward. It is established as the city's economic employment land need for this planning horizon. Housing needs analysis, you just held your public hearing on that, so that will be the housing need that will move forward as part of this urban growth boundary. And then as we talked about the land use efficiency measures, as well as the vacant and redevelopable land in the city, move together to address what can we put within the city limits, how much land in the city limits can accommodate some of this growth and development that we anticipate over the next 20 years. So we take those numbers together and we come up with 855.2 acres of needed expansion area over the 20-year planning horizon. Next slide, please. So in order to decide where this 855 acres goes within the area that we're allowed to look at, we did break it into sub areas so that we could use these 4 urbanization categories to be able to compare each area to the other. So we looked at efficient accommodation of identified land needs, how to orderly and economically provide the public facilities and services. We heard that in the comments. Bill addressed that from public comments we received previously. We have to do what's called an EC analysis, environmental, energy, economic, and social consequences, and then compatibility with nearby agriculture and forest activities. As we know, much of this land is on agricultural land and adjacent to it. So a lot of that score was very equal across all of the sub areas. Next slide, please. So there was a project advisory committee that convened for this purpose to look at where we should expand. And that was a group made up of representatives from City Council, Planning Commission, the Parks Board, area residents, business owners, and technical advisors to help determine where we should look when expanding the urban growth boundary. And the proposal that came out of that group is the dashed purple line shown on your screen. The dark green line is the total study area, all of the undesignated lands and exception lands. The dashed purple is where the proposal is to expand. So what is before you this evening is the dashed purple line to and the city's urban growth boundary. Next slide, please. And in order to establish that area, the planning group did need to make some base assumptions about how land might develop, whether it's employment or residential. These are not set. These are part of that next process Bill spoke to, the concept planning process. They just gave a rough idea of how it could develop so that we could make some assumptions over how much use of land would occur. So densities of housing, types of employment land need, where those might best be served. There was not full consensus of this, so from the body, but there was enough consensus to move it forward as the outline for the UGB expansion. So that is what the Planning Commission has seen before. It continues to be the same outline area. So everything that's in blue or yellow on the map before you is what's being recommended to move forward. But the blue and yellow is not being recommended to move forward, if that's not super confusing for everybody. But it does include a total of 167.4 acres of residential, which does include your housing, infrastructure, and parks, and then 687.8 acres of employment land that includes commercial, industrial, and the infrastructure needed to support that. With that, I believe I hand it over to Pat.
Introduce yourselves. Yeah.
Chair King and members, my name is Pat Rebellia. My company is PR Land Use Strategies, and I've been helping North Plains on the expansion. Just a little bit of a background. I have a law background in the prior life, and more recently, till I left the city, I was with the city of Hillsborough in the last 7 years as a planning director, and during which time I managed some of their industrial urban growth boundaries, as well as the South Hillsborough urban growth boundary amendment. My task tonight, Chair King and members, is a narrow one. It's to talk about how the UGB expansions before you that you've preliminarily approved, and again, it's before you today, how that expansion complies with Goal 14. For the record, Goal 14 is the UGB goal. And what it requires, let me just get to that. It requires that the city demonstrate a need for housing and industrial land. That's two of the factors in that goal. And the city evaluate alternative locations. And in a prior slide, you saw the 4 evaluation factors that had to be considered. There was a question earlier and in the process about agriculture. As you can see in the slide there, Goal 3, which is state planning Goal 3 relating to protecting agricultural land, and Goal 4 relating to protecting forests do not apply to UGB expansions. So you won't see findings in the supplemental staff report that you have before you relating to Goal 3 and Goal 4. What the report covers is the Goal 14 location factors, and in the prior report that 3J and you had before, what's called the final UGB expansion report, some of the factors were addressed in terms of being considered. Let me just go what the rule says. The rule says you have to, and this is not only in the rule, this is a state law, and this is in the court cases. The rule says you have to consider these location factors when you evaluate alternative UGB expansion sites. And then you have to balance those factors. Considering those 4 location factors, you have to balance them in making a decision. What you have before you The prior report, the final report is a consideration. And it's, as it's stated here, you can see it in tables at pages 39 to 66 of that final report. Those are where those 4 factors were considered by the city. In the supplemental report, you have a matrix. And the matrix, what it does is it balances those factors. And those, it provides findings relating to how those factors were balanced. So both elements of that requirement of Goal 14, to consider these factors and to balance these factors in making the recommendation, were done. And for the record, let me talk a little bit about what balancing means, because when you take action on tonight's material, the balancing of these factors were not before you previously. So hopefully in your motion tonight, you will be approving that part of the.
Sorry about the fly. We can't.
Hey, who brought the fly in here? Yes. So anyway, tonight, the commission is asked to fully complete the Goal 14 evaluation. And that's next slide, please. In doing so, in making that action tonight, you will be fully complying with Goal 14. And that's a major tenet, that's a major piece of the city's UGB expansion effort for both the housing side and on the industrial side. I think I'll stop there, and if there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer questions, but that's what you have before you, Chair King and Commissioners.
Any questions of the testimony so far from the Planning Commission? Commissioner Levante?
Just a clarification. I've seen lots of literature on the city's website and even in our posting in our water bill that said that the UGB amendment tonight is not to make any changes to what was previously approved. It's just to accept the additional findings in Goal 14. Is that correct?
Strictly speaking, no. All of the prior staff reports and everything are still, your decision ultimately has to be based on the entire record, which includes everything you've heard from this, since this process began. It's all part of the record of your decision. And so if you have any questions about anything that you've seen or any questions about, and I guess I'm trying to say is no, you're not just limited to the supplemental staff report. If you have questions about the original staff report or anything else regarding the what became Ordinance 490, the proposed UGB expansion, feel free to open up the questioning.
And so all of those in the previous approval, or excuse me, recommendation from the Planning Commission, we had several conditions. Is there a list of those anywhere, or would somebody have to go back to the record to see what we had conditioned previously?
Those conditions are now included. So we have the boundary description and the property that was in question that were conditions recommended by Planning Commission have now been integrated into the UGB recommendation. So they're part of it, part of the record now.
Well, like on the new updated maps, it doesn't reflect like the boundary on the north boundary on Sunset Highway. That's why I'm asking, what are we opening? Because if
Well, let's get clarification.
Yes. I was under the impression that the maps had changed to include that. So my apologies
so
for
I'm
that.
looking at page 182 of the packet, that shows that it's a new July 2023 map.
Sorry.
Maybe it's not in the map.
I think she means this not.
And
Can you say the page one more time?
182.
Bring it up on the screen.
I see, and the jog is showing on the north side of the highway. That should have been changed.
It's in the
Commissioner Levante, are you referring to this little notch right here?
correct.
Okay.
That is correct. That should, but although. I would
Shows it
say
being
that's
inside the boundary.
Current North Lanes UGB, yes, okay, this
Yes.
is correct. So the blue line is the current boundary, the purple line doesn't include it.
So does that amend any of the acreage and possible boundaries?
No, because we asked DLCD staff this question and they responded that OAR 660 024 0040 sub 1 requires us to make a reasonable estimate of the land need, but not unreasonably detailed. I can put that specifically for you, but they were not concerned with the small addition in this site that.
I know that was a question early on, is what would that mean for what we currently have designated?
Yes,
as
and
a proposed model?
I can include, in fact, I would, propose that as we move forward to city council with our packet, we do include that language regarding what level of analysis the OAR requires for the UGB. But it was quoted to us from DLCD staff that is within the margin of error of what we can assume as far as the expansion area.
And that would include any additional roadway areas that have questionable boundary.
Yes, although those boundary descriptions are included that we created. We did go through turn by turn and describe the boundaries.
That's not in my calendar. The actual legal.
Not legal description. We just did a written description of which side of the roadway or which edge of each property.
Oh.
And that is in there, yeah. So that was part of the recommendation from planning commission as well. So those two conditions were moved forward, so I do believe.
Chair King, if I could add one more note before leaving, just so that we can have an understanding. People will differ on the results of your location factors evaluation. But the courts are very clear that North Plains, it's within North Plains authority to evaluate and to make decisions on how they address these location factors and the results. There will be differences about that as this process goes forward. But as long as it's the reasonable outcomes in terms of the evaluation, it's within the city's authority to make those determinations. Just wanted to make sure that's in the record.
Thank you.
If I may enter into the record, the OAR 660 024 0040 sub 1 reference that I'd like to put in the record is that the UGB must be based on the appropriate 20-year population forecast for the urban area as determined under rules in OAR chapter 660 division 32 and must provide for needed housing, employment, and other urban uses such as public facilities, streets and roads, requirements of goal 14 and this rule. The 20-year need determinations are estimates, which, although based on the best available information and methodologies, should not be held to an unreasonably high level of precision. So that is the requirement before us to make our best determinations using the information and methodologies available to us, but not to hold to an unreasonably high level of precision. So including that area was within the margin of error.
So going back to my initial question, if I hate to assume all the previous conditions are in the packet, should there be any reference to ongoing conditions? Or since it was remanded back to us, I don't know how this process works.
Well, so the line does show so there were two conditions from the planning commission. One was just the two, to include the triangular shaped property and to describe the boundary.
Okay.
So we did both of those. Okay, great. So those are both included in the packet.
Continue with the staff report.
Thank you.
So again, this is Chris Crane, the city attorney, and I was asked to address this issue. Questions were raised about the extent to which the governor's authority to designate industrial lands for semiconductor manufacturing and related businesses affects this analysis, going so far as to say we have to take that into account. So the important overarching response to that is when the legislature enacted Senate Bill 4 and gave the governor that authority, they completely exempted that designation process from the state's land use planning laws. Subsection 8 of the bill says, notwithstanding ORS chapter 195, 197, 215, 227, or 268, which governs Metro, the governor could designate the land for industrial and bring it inside a UGB, notwithstanding the state's land use planning program. Moreover, once that land is brought inside, subsection 8 gives local authorities, local jurisdictions authority to amend your comprehensive plans and land use regulations to incorporate and provide for the development of that lands, again, completely outside the state land use planning program, notwithstanding ORS chapters 195, 197, 227, and 268, and so on. The point is that the process for designating industrial lands in Senate Bill 4 exists completely outside the land use planning program. This decision before you tonight on the housing needs analysis and UGB does not. It is expressly subject to Goal 14, the Division 24 rules that govern UGB expansions. And under those rules, as Heather just read into the record, they require the city's UGB to be based on identified housing needs, that's your housing needs analysis, and employment needs. That's the city's economic opportunities analysis that has been recently adopted and identifies a land need of an additional 600 plus acres. So that's the adopted document that the city is required to rely on when determining what your UGB should be going forward for the next 20 years. Finally, we're not completely ignorant of Senate Bill 4, and the economic opportunities analysis does address it and consider that as part of the analysis. And again, that's the city's adopted document that provides the city's employment land needs going forward, and the document, frankly, that we're required to rely on by law to determine what our employment land needs are going forward. Thank you. Any questions?
There any other staff presentation?
Yeah. Sorry, Chair Keating, yes, just a little bit more.
I believe this is back to me. Just to give the comprehensive plan text amendment piece a moment of time. There was a lot of comment and testimony just now about goal 14. That is the urbanization goal of the statewide planning goals. Our comprehensive plan, like almost all the other ones in the state, are based on the statewide planning goals. So we had a lot of updates to our goal 14, our urbanization chapter of our comprehensive plan, but also the housing needs analysis reflected changes in goal 10 housing, and we just made sure that everything was in alignment throughout that comprehensive plan. So no changes are proposed from the previous version. It's still the May 2023 version of the comprehensive plan in your packet this evening. Next.
Okay, I'm going to try to get through these quickly, but I just wanted to walk through urban and rural reserves in North Plains. We got a lot of comments during the last process, as well as in leading up to this hearing about farmland being lost. How much is going to be lost? Is it going to be negative to the farming industry? The state's losing its farmland. And I want to refer everybody back to urban and rural reserves legislation of 2014. Expansion of any urban growth boundary in Washington County, actually any urban growth boundary in the Portland metro region, but certainly within Washington County, has to operate under the rules that were established during the urban and rural reserves process that capped with House Bill 4078 in 2014, signed by Governor Kitzhaber, and established two types of land designations in Washington County, including in Washington County. The first, urban reserves, and we heard a little bit about that earlier, but urban reserves were established in Washington County for high priority urban growth boundary expansion, mostly around the Portland Metro UGB. Right now, nothing around the city of North Plains. But House Bill 4078 established around 13,500 acres of urban reserves, and it's kind of fast track urban growth boundary expansion land for Portland Metro UGB, basically. During that process between 2008 and 2014 with legislation, a process went through where ultimately over 150,000 acres were set aside for 50-year protection for agriculture in Washington County alone, okay? That land has 50 years of permanent protection from any kind of urbanization and reserved for agricultural use until 2040. I can't remember, started in 2054, I think 2064, either way, 50 years based on the legislation. So the only other land in in Washington County, after urban and rural reserves law, starting in 2014, is called undesignated lands. And undesignated lands basically mean land that didn't get either an urban reserve or a rural reserve status. 2 cities in Washington County are surrounded by undesignated lands, and that land was set aside as undesignated so that those 2 cities at a later time could figure out how they might want to grow in the future. North Plains and Banks, both North Plains and Banks are in the same situation of being satellite cities and having undesignated land around them to figure out at a later date. Now, this was back in 2014, fast forward 9 years, and here we are. But I just want to emphasize a process that started in 2008 and ended in 2014 with North Plains, Washington County, property owners, farm interests, land use advocates, resulted in land being set aside and not being designated rural reserves, not being permanently protected for agriculture immediately around North Plains so that it could consider future urbanization. So when we talk about the expansion area, the expansion study area and lands being undesignated, that's where all that came from. All of the land around us that's in the UGB study area and that we limit ourselves to for studying urban growth boundary expansion was long ago set aside by the legislature through a 6-year process for the city to consider future urbanization. It is something the city is allowed to do as long as it follows the rules and the check boxes, and the community goes through the process that it should. And this is a key part right here, the planning commission hearing all of this. But what we looked at was strictly that undesignated land that was set aside long ago. Here's a map of it. Thank you, sir. Here's North Plains, Portland Metro UGB right here. North Plains and Banks. Urban reserves are this blue land, kind of these places that were considered high priority future Portland Metro UGB expansion areas. The green, all of this 155,000 acres is permanently set aside agriculture land to protect farming interests and farming sustainability in Washington County. It cannot be touched for urbanization, by urbanization. This land here is our urban growth boundary expansion study area, and it is undesignated, and it was set aside as undesignated deliberately by leadership and the legislature to allow us to consider where to expand in the future. Banks is in the same situation. This is undesignated land that was set aside and codified by the urban reserves legislation for banks to have flexibility for future expansion. It's all farmland, except for this is exception lands, where we look first in our UGB expansion. All of this is farmland, but it was set aside by the urban reserves process and legislation. Same with banks. This is all farmland, basically. But just those slivers of land in this sea of agricultural land, permanently protected agricultural land. These areas, the 2 cities, can consider future UGB expansion, and that's what North Plains is doing right now, consistent with the rules and urban reserves law. So we just want to be clear that we get a lot of comment and concern about farming, but I think we have a lot of people perhaps new to the area, or they don't remember this process, and that this is the law of the land about how North Plains and other cities have to go about UGB expansion in Washington County. And North Plains was the other point to make, all of this urban reserve was not only, this rural reserve area was not only set aside for agriculture, but to provide a buffer for North Plains to remain being a satellite city, even after it grew into these areas. So North Plains was set up to be a satellite city, and it can't grow any further than the undesignated lands for a 50-year period. Those are the rules by which we're operating right now with everything we've presented to you. This is just very quickly, this is just an excerpt from basically an account of the urban reserves process that Metro has on their website that documents the whole process. And we just want to emphasize here that the legislation that was signed in 2014 was basically made law what was called the Grand Bargain. And that was an agreement that was hashed out between these parties here, an agreement of where urban reserves, rural reserves, and undesignated lands would be. They all agreed to that. And then, and as it says, of all of those parties, notice North Plains was not at the table. We're not only operating within the rules, we're operating within the rules that were handed to us. And at the end of the day, the legislature quickly passed the agreement as the Senate, excuse me, the House bill I mentioned earlier. So finally, we have 151,000 acres of rural reserve land permanently protecting agriculture, a massive swath of the county. And we're not planning anything that touches that or encroaches upon that. We're planning a fraction of it. In fact, we can only look at planning up to a maximum of almost 1,600 acres. So roughly, what, 1% of that is what North Plains is allowed to even think about possibly planning over a 50-year period. Our UGB expansion of 855 acres is an even smaller slice of that. So we just want to make it clear. Everything we've been doing has been consistent with House Bill 4078 that established urban and rural reserves and undesignated areas. That included buy-in from parties for and against urban growth boundary expansions of various types, and those who were concerned about the land, including farming and industry and home building and the governments around the area in the counties. And all of this is consistent with that. So we just want to be clear about that.
Is this me?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry about this slide, is Bill's. So just to wrap up and give some conclusions and then talk about what the next steps for this process are. And I'll add, so the proposed UGB complies with all of the applicable state and local planning goals and requirements. We've quoted a lot of land use goals for you tonight, a lot of OAR requirements. We've looked at them all. We've made sure that we are complying with everything that goes into allowing the city to expand its urban growth boundaries. We've reviewed everything with representatives from the state of Oregon, just making sure that we are following the right process. The proposed UGB expansion is supported by the EOA, which was adopted in 2022, as well as the housing needs analysis that you made a recommendation on this evening, and the findings that are in the staff report, both the staff report and the supplemental materials that were in the packet this evening. In addition, I do want to respond to Commissioner Labante's question. I did pull up the minutes from the last public hearing the Planning Commission held on this, and the conditions that were added were to cleaning up the alignment of 10105 Northwest 314th Avenue to be included in the UGB, which is now shown on the maps of the purple dashed line, as well as to ensure all roadways are adequately taken in by the UGB expansion. And that was accomplished in your packet on page 193 of 603, Appendix B, North Plains UGB description. We did go through to make sure that all roadways are included and that you could follow that description and include those in. Yes. So both of the recommendations from the past Planning Commission recommendation were included and are moving forward with this current iteration of the UGB report. So with that, staff recommends the Planning Commission forward the city planning file, as Steve Miller, your planning manager, mentioned, rather than the ordinances specifically, but this planning file, the CPA file to the city council with a recommendation of approval at a public hearing they will hold on September 5th, 2023. No, next steps. The ordinance adoption is what happens when the city council gets a chance to hold their public hearing. They've done that once, they rescinded, and now they'll have a chance to do that again. Then the whole process goes on at Washington County. In addition, we've been in contact with Washington County staff to make sure that that's in the works for the fall. Everything gets submitted to DLCD. The DLCD director issues a decision, including consideration of objections. I believe they can also forward it directly to LCDC, who would conduct a meeting to acknowledge the expansion or approve the expansion. So there's still quite a bit of process after the city makes their decision. We move on to the county and then at the state level. So nothing super quick, but we are in the process of moving through that. Okay, so just finally, we recommend the planning commission make a recommendation on these city file numbers moving forward to the city council on September 5th, 2023, with all of the documents in the record of this evening's packet. And I believe with that, we can accept any questions or happy to entertain any questions from the planning commission.
Are there any questions of the staff testimony? This is just for the planning commission right now, and then we'll get to the audience. Hearing none, are there any proponents that signed up who wish to speak in favor of proponent? Yes.
Roy Henry, I'm in support of the UGB grant expansion, per HB 4078, grand bargain. The fact that there'll be a lot of high value employment throughout the city.
Any questions of the testimony? Hearing none, thank you, sir.
I am Eric Lawson, 32410 Northwest Wasco Street. I am here representing the Economic Development Committee. I'm the chair of the Economic Development Committee, as well as that committee on the Project Advisory Committee for the UGB expansion process. So I'm a familiar face to many of you. I'm submitting testimony as I did in the previous planning commission meeting. I will read through our comments as a EDC group, and we'll answer any questions. Planning Commission members, the North Plains Economic Development Committee has consistently taken up the issue of the current UDD expansion study and the report conditions being reviewed tonight by the Planning Commission. As mentioned in previous testimony, the EDC has had representation on the UGB Project Advisory Committee and has been an active participant in the matter for multiple years. After reviewing the additional information submitted in the city report, the EDC would like to reinforce our support to move forward with the recommendation for city file CPA 23-056 urban growth boundary expansion and comprehensive plan text amendments. We would also like to thank the city staff, consultants, and other stakeholders for their engagement with the North Plains community members. The EDC maintains the recommendation provides a well-balanced expansion of land that will benefit current and future residents, as well as the current and future economy of the city. Along with bringing in more available land for job creation, the proposal helps reverse the trend of North Plains becoming a bedroom community by bringing jobs within city limits. Below our aforementioned points, the EDC is focused on throughout our evaluation of the UGB expansion process, and we feel recommendations provide sufficient land options to achieve these goals. An industrial focus held on the west side of town near Northwest Durham Road, Highway 26 exit that would help lessen any industrial traffic from residential areas. Traffic flow driven into downtown area, but not residential areas, as the city concurrently works on downtown revitalization. and incorporation of a community park around the existing lake in the northwest region of the expansion area. Any questions?
Hello, thank you for hearing me, and thank you to all involved in this process, past and present. My name is Heidi Van Raden, and my address is on my card. I'm in full support of this expansion, and I grew up in West Union and neighboring community, like 30 neighbors, so. This community means a lot to me, and I'd love to see it thrive. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you.
Greetings, City Councilors, Planning Commission members, and members of the community. My name is Andy Gaden. I'm a property owner in Washington County and have property within the North Plains Urban Growth Boundary Reserves, located at 12650 Northwest Old Country Ridge Road. I would like to start by thanking you for your time and dedication to your community. After all, we are all here. You have input so that decisions that affect our community can be made wisely. As a third generation member of the community, my family farmed, lived, and logged throughout Washington County. I know the land around North Plains is good farmland because I farmed it. I also know that if the city is to thrive, it must be able to grow. And if North Plains sits in the middle of prime farmland, it has no choice but to see that farmland used to make it grow. Most important is to balance the needs of the rural and the urban members, to communicate the plan and make that whole process transparent, which I think the city of North Plains has done. I cannot agree with all the decisions that have been made or will be made, but I do think the established process was followed. We participated in that process for over at least 20 years and knew that eventually growth would occur on our land. In summary, I'd like to see as much farm dirt preserved as possible, and yet still have enough dirt available to build on so that my children can afford a home. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you, sir.
My name is Nathan Georges. I live on 27480 Northwest Lake Road, right down the street. I've been living there for nearly 30 years with my family. We bought our house from my father-in-law, who built the house. And he bought to farm with his brother over on Jackson Square Road, which is right over to the east of the Plains. This is something we didn't take lightly because of how it affects us personally. But we felt that the way the city was planning this, and because of how this area is growing, we felt that we would go along with this. In fact, we welcome it because of how responsible they have been. We feel that this is only appropriate to move forward, and so we also are in favor of this.
Any questions? Thank you.
Don Maltese, earlier. The one constant that I just sitting there thinking that over the years has been North Plains getting one from a veteran community. Stated earlier by adding housing that caused it to become a veteran community. Veteran community by one definition is now things where people commute to work, basically put their heads down in one place and then drive to work. The expansion of urban growth fund is going to allow jobs to be created there. There's no doubt about it. I think all of us realize that the cost for an hour and a half to do the work, or one gentleman said to go to the store, we did to that's when you can spend it with your family. It's a lot more fun than soccer with your kid or people all over the place and sitting in traffic. Plus, it's less costly. Yeah. If it was approved today, and I'm not, it's probably a couple year process. It's not going to happen overnight. And through that process, the city has already spent tens of thousands of dollars of planning, but the additional process that comes aboard That's where, quite frankly, the developers will start. This is an expensive process as far as the infrastructure and everything. That'll be part of the approval process for anybody that comes through the door. Where are you gonna get sewer? Where are you gonna get water? They have to provide that. So I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. The other thing is delayed costs the consumer money. When I first came out here 30 years ago, you could buy an acre of land here for $35,000-$40,000. Now, before you turn a spade of dirt, you're gonna spend $100,000 probably in permits improvements. So it just makes common sense, and it certainly makes common sense if you look at the map of the city and we've got here a little bit. But here we go, fine. It's gonna go down to Highway 26, or we go down to Highway 26, or Bill jumps over the Highway 26 and that's right. So, thank you very much for your time.
Any questions? Thank you, sir. Chairman King and members of the council, commission, my name is Charlie Hopewell. My address is on the card. That's my home address. Our business address is right down the street here. As I was previous CEO and chairman of GeoChem. I'm here both as a business member of this community as well as someone who's sat on the UGB advisory process for, I think, well over 3 years now. In both instances, I hope I represent to you a business that has contributed to this community for many, many years and wishes to continue to operate within this community. As well, I have been impressed as a member of the study committee at the thoroughness of the process, the voices that we heard from these past years, and the thoughtfulness associated with helping this community grow well into its future. I also applaud North Plains for putting this process in place from both an economic as well as community health standpoint. Growth is expensive, and maintaining a community is also expensive. I believe the North Plains City Council and its leadership understand this well and don't want that full burden placed only on residents of the community. Business and industry supplies much needed assistance to a healthy growth, economic activity, as well as tax revenues, places of employment, and income taxes for those residents. And what our community leaders recognize is that we were a very resident-centric community and wanted to study and designate land that would and could be allocated for appropriate business and industry growth. We'd like neighbors in business as well in our particular organization. This step is critical to North Plains' future and its tax base. I am and likely remain a novice regarding all of the processes that must take place to walk this kind of community expansion forward. The expert consultants and city leadership were terrific about laying out the process, providing needed support for the discussions we had and study of suggestions, as well as providing ongoing, well-understood synopsis for the choices we had in front of us. In no instance did I, or I think any of the members of the advisory group, feel that we were being pushed or directed by any cities or consultant participants. We all participated in discussions. There was lots of back and forth conversation, and I feel our final recommendations are both sound and balanced. I would like to assure this community this is and continues to be a thoughtful process that has had many opportunities for input and witnessed many voices along the way. We love being a part of this community. We love it. We'd love it if our trucks didn't have to roll down Commercial Main. But we'll see what happens in the future. But we've actually appreciated the patience of the residents within the community. We hope to continue to provide work, taxes, and engagement. There's yellow barriers around the Garlic Festival. That's the GeoChem site, right? And I'll finish up. We want to see it continue for both residents and businesses in the future so that we can remain country-centric, but also business and resident-centric. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Chris.
Chair King and members of the commission. My name is Rudy Cadlip. I'm the CEO of First of Pacific Communities, 9420 Southeast Longfield Road in Clackamas. I've been a large-scale master plan developer in the region for the last 33 years, creating communities in Washington, Clackamas, and Multnomah counties. And I've been involved with the city of North Plains for the last 26 years, dating back to the last urban growth boundary expansion. Assisting back then with the planning and direction of growth for both the north and the east. During the last 4 or 5 years, I've had the opportunity to serve on numerous committees. Even though I'm not a resident of North Plains, I was able to sit on the visioning committee that we had, the TSP update, the housing needs analysis, the economic opportunities analysis. I've been welcomed into the individual offices of many of the planning commissioners, including Mr. King, many of the city councilors, including the mayor. Something that you wouldn't be able to do in a lot of jurisdictions in the metro regions. The attention, and again, I don't want to be repetitive with some of the things that have been already said, but the attention to detail here has been phenomenal. The point being, the city staff, its consultants, and I've had a chance to meet with the consultants on numerous occasions. The council, the commission, have all been open book and communicative with the public throughout this UGB expansion process. I've had a chance to meet with the city manager, the planning director, the finance director. The city is open to listen to and talk to anyone, a citizen of the city or not. I appreciate the opportunity the city has provided to participate in this process, and I fully support the planning commission's recommendation.
Sure. For proponents that are in the audience, if they pass.
I think we exhausted the room.
Seems like having on the audience that- I'm sure you signed up for that. So, proponents on the Zoom.
Chair King, I see no proponents on Zoom.
All right, thank you. Then opponent, people wish to testify again.
Good evening, Chair King and Commissioners. My name is Jackie Dyke Jones. My address has been submitted. I'm a 4th generation farmer. I farm in North Plains, Roy, and Banks. I was raised on Mountaindale Road, and I farm literally 1 field over from the west sub area proposed UGB designation. Perhaps this body would expand their 250 feet notification for future projects. I still can't bring myself to fill out the online city survey, Love North Plains, because currently I have a hard time with this. You see, I'm strongly opposed to the UGB proposal because I feel like it's not perfect yet. I think North Plains could come up with a less aggressive proposal that would not impact the local agriculture, economy, and infrastructures. The EFU farmland is finite. None is being made, cannot make more farmland. And throughout this process, there has been the communication from North Plains. Yes, there's been a lot of hard work, a lot of money available. It's going to happen anyway. But you know what? You're not required to literally obliterate the farmland right now. You are required to evaluate and plan. Please add to your report or consider sharing with constituents also what else is being taken away beyond the world-class soils. Economically, how will these acres impact Washington County? What is the rate of farmland being taken out of production? How many people do these acres in North Plains currently employ? Where do our commodities go? How many people do we feed? How much carbon is being captured by these acres? I did skim the 603 pages, and I see that the ag forest compatibility analysis remains the same, but I wanted to point out one more thing, that the picture of the crops from 2022, I wonder if staff has checked to see that in 2023, for example, have any of the agribusiness changed their commodities? Would that change what you would rate as a conflict? Literally anything could be raised on these soils. You see a grass field, a cornfield, anything could be raised here. It is short-sighted to think and say that this farmland is simply being treated as disposable by the county, and I find that offensive. Protecting farmland is for the future of everyone. A 20-year plan, a 50-year plan with something so finite. I feel like the North Plains vision includes the history and natural resources, yet is not being reflected as a shared value. Please vote no. Spend more time on this to recalibrate, find win-win solutions for our residents and our businesses and our farm. Thank you.
Any questions with the testimony?
Commissioners, Strickland. No, for the record, my name is Aaron Nichols. I live at 11,000 Northwest Jackson, Florida Road, my phone. So I'm here tonight to ask you to vote no. I know it's 490, allow it the more thorough process, more public involvement, and a better plan. I submitted a written comment yesterday. I hope you all a chance to read before you vote. It outlines many problems need to be expansion as it stands now, most particularly the discouragement of public comment and involvement in the process, the lack of consideration and understanding of the loss of finance in the area, and the city's lack of readiness for expansion. But that's not what I want to discuss tonight. I want to highlight that a better plan possible, that a plan that includes and has support to the citizens of the city, the farmers, the residents, people who have to live with it. And also have a much better chance of funding for those who are going to have to pass it to the county and the state. In just a few past months, I think you and your consultants have access to a lot more information than you had just a little bit ago. Dozens of people testified from the equity farmers like Jackie, experts in soil like Dean Milberg, other elected governmental bodies like the Soil and Water Conservation District and the Folsom Valley Location District. Furthermore, a lot of work has been done engaging citizens. Those folks out this week, everyone in the zip code, local farmers hearing about the expansion, citizens are becoming more interested. The work of Farm First and other organizations has uncovered useful maps and information out the sand and compares it to expansion from other cities. I think though very voluminous, the current urban growth study has yet to be serious. It is not like the trade-offs and other issues, both the legal and the moral ones involved. There's no data or indication that the employment land is in jobs, not data centers, with the connected communities that will wonder and won't end up being identical to recent expensive and low density housing, housing that employees on my farm could never afford. So I think it would be a waste of everyone's time and everyone's money to only get serious after the plan being handed by the county of the LCP. We're at a good starting point now. So let's make use of what we've got. Let's make use of the momentum we have now. Let's wait a little bit and make a better plan. That's what I'm asking.
Any questions with the testimony?
name is Dean Milbury. I'm a resident of Washington County, and my address is on the card that I submitted. Chair King, commission members, and city staff, thanks for the opportunity to comment tonight. I recently retired after 35 years with the U.S. Department of Agriculture in 4 states. And I currently serve on the board of the Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District and the board of the Cedar Mill Farmers Market. But my testimony tonight is on my behalf and not on behalf of any board or agency that I am a part of or was a part of. I have a PhD in environmental science and engineering that is supported by a dissertation in the mineralization of organic matter in soils of Western Oregon. And I recently am a co-author of the book, The Soils of Oregon. The proposed North Plains UGB expansion includes sites that vary from approximately 72 to 92% prime farmland soils. Prime farmland is defined as land that has the best combination of physical and chemical characteristics for producing food, seeds, forage, fiber, and oilseed crops. Less than 5% of Oregon is prime farming, and the soil in the proposed North Plains UGB expansion area is some of the best farmland soils in the world. The subareas considered in the UGB expansion are not all equal in the percentage of prime farmland that they include. The 150,000 roughly acres of rural reserve in Washington County does not have that high percentage of prime farmland that is surrounding North Plains and is in the proposed UGB expansion. And in fact, much of it is not even capable of being cropped. The urbanization of these productive soils would harm the agricultural community and economy. And urbanization also risks disrupting the hydrology of the area. Most farms around here have subsurface drains, and it's very common for the subsurface drains to connect from one farm to another. And so farmland that's adjacent to the UGB expansion could be hurt drainage wise if construction in the UGB disrupts those tile drains that are coming out of existing farmland. I ask that you reconsider the proposed expansion with a more balanced approach that minimizes the impact of prime farming. Thanks again for the ability to comment, and thank you for your volunteer service.
Any questions?
Yes.
You stated that it was some of the timeline in the urban reserve of the study area. Is that just the study area, or is that all undesignated lands around that?
The percentages that I gave were for the proposed expansion. That's, I created soil maps and looked at just the areas that are proposed for UGB expansion. The blue and the yellow areas on these maps. Thanks for your question, Commissioner.
Thank you, sir.
Chair King, members of the commission, thank you for the opportunity to testify. For the record, my name is Nellie McAdams. My address is on the card I submitted. I am testifying in opposition to ordinance 490 for several reasons. First, the city failed to meet the letter or the spirit of Land Use Goal 1 public engagement. We are here today because the city failed to notice the first vote of the planning commission in the newspaper. If the city did send written notice on that first meeting, I have not received the affidavit, so I'll follow up to see if that was created. Because of that lack of notice, the planning commission's prior decision was invalid, as was the decision of the city council. Yet members of the public were told that they could only comment today on the amendments, not the full proposal, because the prior votes were final. This is not true and discouraged comment today. In addition, I met numerous residents of North Plains, those in the expansion area, and those just on the UGB, who have not known this process was underway until now. City residents voted to reject expansion many times over. Now the city would make the biggest expansion yet on its own. Second, the city did not address impacts of UGB expansion on agriculture and forestry. As you heard, the city must address expansion compatibility with ag and forestry as part of Goal 14. The city's consideration of agriculture, however, was cursory, unbalanced, and focused on the impact that ag would have on urban properties, not the irrevocable damage that this expansion would have on existing agricultural industries from traffic, loss of associated businesses, the permanent loss of the best soil in Oregon or the world. Soils and ag experts were not consulted in this process, to my knowledge, nor was Walton Valley Irrigation District until after the first decision. Third, the city did not demonstrate a need for expansion to this size. The 20-year planning process is determined how to meet projected needs. It does not require a city to grow into almost more than half of its footprint that's available. The city discussion of boundary locations refers mainly to the proximity to the UGB, but of course an expansion should abut an existing UGB. The city gave no good reason to move west or north away from development either. Moreover, the request for industrial land is not founded in reality. The Semiconductor Task Force members acknowledged that they overlooked almost 10,000 acres of industrial land already within UGBs and closer to Portland International Airport than North Plains. Much of it. None of the CHIPS applications so far have requested more land inside or outside of UGB. There is plenty of existing land in UGBs for industrial use, and that is subject to consideration under the land use program. Regardless of the size of expansion, the city has not demonstrated an ability to provide an infrastructure within existing boundaries, including a grocery store transit system, and should focus on these needs first. The city seems to believe that new industry will address current budgetary concerns, but this has not panned out for Hillsborough, which is losing money on industrial tax breaks. The law doesn't allow increased tax revenue alone to justify expansion, and this would not be subsidized by low density bonds. For those reasons, I urge you to vote no on this expansion. Thank you very much.
Any questions of the testimony? Thank you, ma'am. Other opponent? Testify again. Not support.
My name is Katie Warren. My address is on the phone for that. I live in North Plains outside the city center on Berry Creek Road. And although we weren't directly notified, the UGB expansion still directly affects us. Number one, our exit is the Dersham Road exit. It's so peaceful and beautiful as you drive west. You can see Purple Mountains in the background, farmland. I'm just kind of appalled that we would, just turn it into concrete and businesses. It's just really beautiful, and of course it's great farmland, and there's a glider field there too. So from what I understand, Intel is expanding the current factories in Hillsborough and Oahu. It doesn't seem, and this is a question for you guys, it doesn't seem that we're going to get a semiconductor factory in that spot that was allotted. So does that reduce the size of that blue area? Because my opinion is that the industrial land that is on the UGB expansion is excessive. And I don't think we need that much. So, and I have no problem with being a bedroom community. I don't think that should be seen as necessarily a bad thing. And then I have some questions. Bill, you said the rural reserves are permanently protected for 50 years, but that seems like, how can you be permanently protected for 50 years? Does it get renewed every 50 years guaranteed? So that's a question for that. Because what I'm concerned with is that in 20 years, when you run out of land, you can't grow anymore if that's permanent. Protected, so then you're going to have to come back. Also, a lot of the people that I talk to in North Plains, I guess I haven't heard anybody who's been for it, but maybe I just live in a bubble. A lot of the people just want to keep it a small community. And a lot of the people that I talk to don't actually understand what's going on with this process. They're like, I see things online, but it's in legalese information, I just don't understand it. And the few people that I have seen excited about this expansion, are developers, real estate agents, those who have businesses who want their business to grow, profit off it, and city officials who want more tax revenue to do more things. So I ask you to reconsider and make the development plan smaller, particularly the lots for the industrial land. I know you worked hard on this for years, but it's not quite right. It's too much sprawl and doesn't align with the integrity of our small community values. And just one last thing. I feel like the city needs to communicate a little bit better. When I was writing this, the city told me in an email that I could only do testimony for the UGB amendments, which I found out later to not be true. So that's really confusing for the community to know what they can talk about or when they can voice their opinion. Thank you.
Any questions of the citizens? Thank you.
My name is Brian Miller and I'm a North Plains resident. My address is on the card. I actually live on Dairy Creek Road, about a mile past the Mountaindale store. So I was actually outside of the 250-foot radius, so I did not get notice. Actually, I found out about this on Facebook through a group where they were posting about it. And I was basically, I learned that it wasn't actually my fault that I wasn't notified, but this was also not published in the newspaper. So North Plains did not do the bare minimum to notify us. So I'm actually glad that now I have a chance to actually speak against this. I feel like this was almost tried to be snuck in by the way that it was done the bare minimum. It's a kind of a common theme that I've been noticing. We have bike lanes on Dairy Creek Road is said to be a bike friendly road. And if you ever try to ride a bike on Dairy Creek Road, you'll get run over by a dump truck or a farm tractor. So it was just one example of many where we need to spend more time to plan. And that's why I'm here, to open the process and to actually question the motive of our city officials. North Plains is surrounded by prime farmland, much of it being a floodplain to Dairy Creek and other Willamette Valley cities. I assure you that this growth is being fueled by real estate agents, developers, and corporate leaders. There's pipe dreams of chip money, and let's face it, we need to be responsible. We should be growing in an honest and healthy manner, like a small town. We can't have our cake and eat it too.
Any questions for the testimony? Thank you, sir.
Probably pull up the map of the designating green rural reserve that you showed earlier, please.
Sorry, bring up the rules.
The rural reserve map that you had up earlier.
Actually, the other one.
If you want to speak to that.
Give us a minute.
Sure. I'll just start with something else first.
Okay.
My name is Ayla Hoffler. My was on. You guys hear me way back there because this hasn't been working very well. Ayla Hoffler from Banks. Address is on the card. So I've been in North Plains in this area for almost 50 years. Raised my kids up in Mountaindale, farming, logging, and I'm happy to say my children still practice those activities, and I will testify that they are an endangered species. There's a lot of young people that don't know how to dig a well, put in a septic, fix the fence, raise animals, and I'm very proud that my children still hold those standards. I was here in North Plains taking notes at the planning meetings, working with the city planner years ago when we expanded the boundary, taking in promised land. And I have seen, I've practiced land use for about, I don't know, since '82. And I've seen the government make a lot of stupid mistakes, like they wanted to put a dump on the top of a Kona and let it all run down into the plastic stream with the use for the Dairy Creek, okay? Then they wanted to put the dump
a 3-story high building at Dersham exit. So, you know, a chip plant isn't out of the possibility of stupidity. I support the soil ban 100%. And I want to show you on this map that goal 3 actually does apply. I can't help it if the government was too stupid to designate that land as agricultural when it's the best soil in the world. Hello? This green area looks big, but probably 70% of it is timber. This is not farmland. Let's talk about the real percentage here, and then what you're taking away from what we have left. And I'm saying I will fight you all the way to this. I don't care if I go to Luba. You are not taking the west end of this city, this land, and putting it into cities. We need our farmland. I testified long ago when Hillsborough dumped miles and miles of gravel so they could put in all those greenhouses. Okay, on the backside of Cornelius, they dumped gravel after gravel on prime land, and we can't ever use it again. And I testified that we can't eat azaleas. Okay, and you know what? All those greenhouses are empty now. But we're not growing crops. So people wake up. Okay, Safeway is not going to always feed you. So this map is wrong. This is wrong information. The government decided what our zoning was there. We need to change that. Washington County needs to adopt an amendment. And we're not going to develop west with this plan. We will stop it. And I thank you for all your time and energy. But you need to regroup and head in another direction.
Any questions of the testimony? Thank you.
Sorry.
Everything and members of the commission. My name is Fawn Hosey. I submitted a card. I have that. I am really thrilled with the turnout that you have tonight. I don't know whether your efforts are to be credited for that or if it's other word of mouth that we've shared. But the involvement of your community is what brings the best strength to your decision. I hope that you're listening carefully to the opposition as well as the support. Obvious that you're in the midst of prime farmland, and to think that that shouldn't be considered is ridiculous. Your strength, your unique qualities, your charm, your asset as a community is part and parcel of that. It needs to be reflected. I mean, I think of other small towns, you know, Banks, Carlton, Vernonia. They have a vitality that you could have, but not if you are inviting data centers or other intel or a more concrete and paved areas while you're just going to farmland. You could have better density in your commercial district. You know, I mean, study some of those other communities that we all love. And I'm not far from North Plains. This is where I come for a mechanic, for the bank, for the doctor, for meeting my friend, for dinner when I don't feel like preparing it. And that's what I feel that you should capitalize on. Those needs, the personal needs, your bedrooms need those public spaces more than they need factories. And also keep in mind that expansion is expensive, is very expensive. It takes 30 years, as I understand it, to recoup your costs in future tax dollars. And then what? The infrastructure is worn out. And more expansion doesn't just pay for it.
So I just really would love North Plains to have the pride in what it is now and to capitalize on the charms that it could build. And make all of us proud of living in next to North Plains. And as you've heard, I don't see that happening. It's not a done deal. It's not a done deal that any companies are going to come back. Thank you.
Any questions?
Please vote no.
Thank you.
Here to have one, Cherokee. Go ahead, Devin, you're on the clock soon.
Oh, good evening. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Devin Kestner, speaking on behalf of 1,000 Friends of Oregon. The address is PO Box 40367, Portland. And 1,000 Friends is a land use advocacy group focused on preserving farm and forest land across the state. The commission should reconsider the scope and location of this UGB expansion proposal. The city has not demonstrated a need for the massive scope of its proposal, nor has it demonstrated that its boundary location is reasonable. Ensuring that the city actually has a need for the land for its stated purposes is critical, considering the extremely high value soils and active farmland that would be sacrificed for that stated need. I want to first point out that the city, on the one hand, seeks to maintain a small town rural feel when it comes to addressing its residential housing needs, but simultaneously proposes to pave over hundreds of acres of its surrounding rural agricultural lands to site major industrial operations. Another contradiction in the proposal is that the HNA identifies a need for affordable multifamily housing, while the city continues to opt for extremely low density development in expansion areas. This will simply result in more inefficient and unaffordable housing rather than actually addressing the stated housing need in the HNA. Second, the supplementary balancing provided for this hearing ignores very real differences between the sub areas and states that proximity to the existing urban growth boundary trumps everything else. This is not a balancing analysis of all of the factors. One important difference, for example, is that areas of the north and west sub areas are underlaid with irrigation pipelines, some of which would require federal NEPA review and increased assessments on farmers to move. The city fails to balance the factors relevant to the boundary location by ultimately ignoring all other factors to only rely on proximity to the existing UGB to support its decision. I also want to touch on Senate Bill 4. SB 4 is relevant to the city's need for a UGB expansion because it makes it less likely that the projected growth will locate in the UGB expansion area. The city has acknowledged that it cannot develop at least some of the areas without the help of CHIPS funding and semiconductor siting help. That means SB 4's assistance is highly relevant to whether the lands are appropriate for inclusion in the UGB based on the 20-year timeframe. The EOA did not address SB 4 because SB 4 was not in existence in October 2022, and it's therefore relevant under Goal 14 at this point for whether there is a demonstrated need for the full scope of employment lands proposed in the expansion. Finally, the city should address how the fact that the west sub-area is not eligible for a UGB expansion under the urban planning area agreement with Washington County affects this proposal. The Planning Commission should address these concerns and others raised and deny the proposal as it stands. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Any other upcoming? Excuse me, excuse me. At this time, there is no other opponent or anyone wishing to testify neutral, either for or against. Have you testified before? No. Okay. Please come forward.
My name is Scott Walter and I live on 10675 Northwest Jackson School Road. I'm in favor of growth for the city of North Plains, but I do feel that some people were not notified properly about the intention and what was going to occur. My family happened to own 2 pieces of property that were considered for it. We never received any notification until the meeting for tonight. So I don't think, and everybody has said we've been properly notified of what's going on through the whole process. That is not true. That's all I want to say.
Any questions of the testimony? Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to testify in neutral? Is there anyone on the Zoom? They have 4 other cards that someone signed their name to, filled out. Are they wanting to testify? They still in the audience?
Hello, my name is Rick Yeager. My address is on the card. And I am in favor of the expansion. Appreciate all the good work and it's been my observation, due diligence, I think, has been there. So I approve of the expansion.
Any questions of the testimony? Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else wishing to testify either for or against? The blue cards that you fill down.
Very briefly, my name is Chris Evans and I'm a consultant. My company's address is 525 3rd Street, Suite 234, Lake Oregon. I represent 5 property owners in the southeast study area that would all be brought into this UGB expansion. You have heard from some of them tonight. North of Highway 26, west of Jackson Street Road, east of McKay Creek, and south of West Union Road. I simply just, based on some of the comments that I have heard regarding the prospect of employment and growth in the semiconductor industry, I would just point you to comments that are in the record from both Oregon Business and Industry Association, as well as the Technology Association of Oregon, that support the city's both economic analysis, as well as the housing needs analysis. And both of those letters provide a good amount of detail about the work and the study that was conducted by McKinsey Consultants on behalf of the Oregon Semiconductor Competitiveness Task Force, all of which support your initiative. Furthermore, what I would say is that if you look at that task force report, what you will find is that a wide variety of land use needs are required. So while opponents may want to focus on 500-acre sites and 250-acre sites, which are the primary impetus of the changes made in SB 4, and that the governor has authority for, the primary need that we're seeing, if you look within that report, or for sites that are 10 acres and 20 acres and 25 acres and up to 50 acres, all throughout the supply chain, because you cannot build, Intel is not able to retool and operate the Rondler Acres campus without a broad ecosystem of suppliers that are supporting that. And for as much has been said about soil characteristics, this is a decision that was made more than 9 years ago. And it was made through a broad consensus-based process that actually resulted in the protection of massive amounts of farmland across the state of Oregon. So this was negotiated a long time ago, and some folks may wish to undo that or change that process. But this has been what we've planned to do for a long time, and I really applaud what you guys are doing.
Furthermore, I would just point you, and I think I'm actually going to submit the Oregon Semiconductor Competitiveness Task Force report into this record so that you will have it in the secretary.
Any questions or discussion? Sure. Anyone else wishing to testify? Yeah.
My name is Susie Luther, and I live on Jackson Foley Road. And I feel like I'm a member of this community because I love the coming to North Plains. It's convenient, close, it's a wonderful community, and a good place to live. And I look forward to the kind of expansion that I really do when we're not provide for. But I really take some exception to some of the expansion that you're looking at. I think one of the things that you said earlier was a very compelling report about the legislature that was some years ago setting aside undesignated land. But they did not have was the benefit of a fiscal law. And I think that's what needs to happen right now, is to take a step back and ask yourself, it's been 20 to 30 years from now, will a semiconductor be a commodity as much as to improve the people? I think that's the thing that I would like to see taken into consideration. Just to maybe take a step back and listen to what the neighbors are saying, what they're concerned about. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you. Anyone else in the audience wishing to address the panel? Bruce Walters. Ben Gray. Marty Brock.
That be able to somebody else? Yeah.
Have you testified?
I have something.
All right, thank you. Anyone else that hasn't testified? Right, if there's none of it, then we'll let the city and staff do the rebuttal.
I think there are probably two things I would say in rebuttal. First, just a reminder of the information that was presented earlier, in that the land around North Plains that's undesignated was decided with city input over a 6-year process that culminated in legislation that set the law of the state of Oregon, including Washington County, to enable the city of North Plains to have room to grow, not a ton of it, roughly 1,500 acres, but set aside as undesignated land, most of that farmland, but that was considered. The county studied the soils and identified the farm and forest land as part of the process. The state did. Farming interests on both sides of the table and neutral, and having a stake in everything were part of the 6-year process that set aside this undesignated land for this community to grow. And so I would just remind you that despite how people feel about farmland, and there are strong feelings, understandably, but this land you're considering has been set aside by law for you to grow into, following a proper process, and that's what this is. The second thing I want to state is we heard some comments tonight about North Plains hasn't justified its employment land need, but the land need that the city has expressed is excessive, or it hasn't supported that. It has unrealistic expectations of employment growth. What I want to remind everybody here, of course, is that you all heard and recommended for adoption, and City Council later adopted an an economic opportunities analysis that modified the economic development chapter of your comprehensive plan and set out the need for the industrial and other commercial acreage that are part of this urban growth boundary expansion. And not only that, with adoption, there was a challenge period after that that ended on December 31st, 2022. The state of Oregon received no challenge to the EOA and the land need we're talking about here for employment uses. That document is now adopted and acknowledged by the state of Oregon, and we therefore have justified the employment land need that you all are considering. There is no legal question about it. So questions and doubts about that aside, the employment land need is justified, and it is determining how you all have to look at this UGB expansion. So those are the two things I would.
You don't get a timer.
No, I'm done. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chair King, members of the commission. This is Chris Crane, the city attorney again. Very briefly, I think there are three things I'd like to respond to. One is goal one in the public notice. Again, just to get this in the record, the public notice requirements for hearing of this kind are set forth in the city code at 155.032 subsections 2 and 3. They require mailed notice to everybody within people who own property within 250 feet of the affected area and published notice. The planning commission's first hearing on this, we sent out mailed notice to everyone, but we did not publish notice. The city council's first hearing, we mailed notice and published notice. Now, again, back before the planning commission again, we both mailed notice and published notice, and we presumably would do again for the city council. So the city has, whether or not we made a mistake before, we certainly didn't this time. So the city has complied with all of the notice requirements that are required by law. On the urban and rural reserves designation, I actually was involved in House Bill 4078 process, and believe me, I would have drawn a different map too, but I don't get to make that decision any more than anybody else in this room does, unless you want to run for the legislature and get the state law changed. The map is what the legislature decided, and it is a law just like every other state law that we are compelled to follow. We simply can't ignore the designations and wish that the area around the city was designated as rural reserve and protected as farmland. First Metro and Washington County, their maps did not protect the area around the city as rural reserve. Those maps were approved by LCDC, and ultimately the map that was approved by the legislature did not protect the area around the city as farmland, did not designate these areas as rural reserves. I understand folks still wanting to fight those old battles, but the law is what it is. On Senate Bill 4, the city's urban growth boundary proposal is not predicated on Senate Bill 4, right? So this process started long before the Semiconductor Task Force report came out. This task force report that prompted Senate Bill 4. The other interesting thing about some of the comments we heard is that, and in, I believe it was Thousand Friends letter, they say, well, there's lots of industrial land still available in other areas around the state, and the governor can't designate lands under Senate Bill 4 if there's other industrial lands available. Well, fine, that may undermine Senate Bill 4 and mean that the governor can't designate anything, but the city's UGB proposal is not predicated on the assumption that the governor will designate land around North Plains for industrial use. As far as I know, the governor's decision-making process is a black box. There may be others in the room who have better information than I do, but we don't know whether the governor will ever designate land around North Plains, and we can't assume that it will. And our proposal is not predicated on the speculation that it might happen. The economic opportunities analysis that is adopted and applies and establishes the city's land need is much, much broader than Senate Bill 4. And then finally, one of the witnesses said, it might have been, anyway, that the city has not demonstrated need. If you look at the statewide planning rules for UGB expansions, it says it has to be based on our population forecast. And you heard Ms. Austin say that what prompted this was this effort was the Portland State University's revised population forecast for Washington County and jurisdictions in Washington County. And so that was the first thing that we took into account, was the population forecast for the city. Also has to be based on the city's housing needs, and employment opportunities going forward. You've already got the employment opportunities analysis that's adopted and the housing needs analysis you forwarded tonight with the recommendation that be approved. The city has demonstrated need. Those documents are in the record, and in at least the case of the EOA, they're already adopted and acknowledged. So the city has demonstrated all the need that is required by the law. Happy to answer any questions.
Just one thing I want to bring up, we got a lot of testimony, written testimony sent to us that kind of the last day or so. I mean, you know, a lot of times we're prepared stuff ahead of time, but have you looked at and any concerns or questions, especially there was a lengthy letter from the 1,000 Friends of Oregon. So do we have any concerns moving forward? Based on any of that?
I can say absolutely that I read through it in detail, and that's why I addressed their Senate Bill 4 arguments here tonight, at least in that testimony. I believe, Heather, did you want to say anything about they had comments also about the housing needs analysis,
Yes.
which you've already approved, but I think it's important to get on the record.
Yes, thank you, Chair King. There were 3 pages of comments regarding the housing needs analysis, so we did update the presentation today to include those concerns and provide responses to those. So that was in the PowerPoint presentation.
If I might, Chair King, as I intentionally mentioned the EOA being adopted and acknowledged by the state, and therefore our employment land justified in part because of extensive comments from 1,000 Friends to the effect of we haven't justified our employment land need, but again, also reinforced by Mr. Crean, that is not true. It is acknowledged, and we have substantiated all of that.
Any of the planning commission have any questions of the rebuttal testimony? Hearing none, is there any discussion?
It's not necessarily comments regarding the rebuttal, but just before we head into discussion, questions for staff. One of the testimonies we heard this evening was about effectively agreement with Washington County for the western expansion area. I don't know what that actually was or what it entailed. If anyone can speak to it. I don't know if they have an agreement or.
Urban planning
Is it just?
agreement.
No,
It's just the UPA, yeah.
Commissioner Levante, I will let Pat Regalia comment on that specifically.
Yeah. That's a reference to the city, county, urban planning area agreement. And those agreements, as a matter of course, once a decision is made to expand the boundary, meeting all the state requirements, those then be amended to include the area that's referenced. So it is not a barrier at this point. It is basically a process issue between the city and the county.
I can tell you that there are state law requirements that cities and counties have these urban planning area agreements, also referred to as urban growth management agreements. Every city's got one with it, whatever county it's in. And as Mr. Regalia said, mostly they're a process for managing communication and coordination between the jurisdictions. They, require specifically notice of land use applications and one that might affect the other, plan amendments and things and so on. And we have been coordinating with the county on that. And as the cities, what people need to understand, I think, is that just because the urban growth boundary is expanded doesn't mean any of that area is inside the city. It's not. We still have to plan it. The city still has to annex it. We are years away from that land, but from all of that land certainly being developed. But as the city does grow and annex those areas, the urban planning area agreement, UPAA, adjusts to accommodate the new boundaries.
We've heard a lot about the excessive amount of acres, and obviously both our Jenny and EOA specify specific acreage for those uses. I think we spoke about this before, but
if you can refresh my memory, do we have to bring in all of the acreage listed in those separate packets, or would we want to modify it? That's a great question. The state law, I believe, does require that when a housing needs analysis is presented and approved by a city, you must take immediate action to provide for the lands that are called for that expansion. So I do not believe that's the same with employment land. You're not immediately compelled to act with your EOA as we were not previously. However, we are compelled to look at a 20-year planning horizon with our UGB. So that is the process to look for the entire planning period and designate the land in that way.
That's correct. The goal 14 admonition that we have to plan for future housing and economic development is implemented through LCDC's rules division 24. And one of those rules says our UGB has to be based on the city's identified employment needs and housing needs and population. We have an identified employment land need. The housing analysis then adds the housing land need. And so we know what our needs are. So accommodating less than what we've demonstrated the need for would arguably violate the goal 24 rules. Or the goal 14 rules in division 24. So we are required by state law to accommodate the amount of land for which we've shown a need.
Any other questions? Any other questions from the planning commission?
Sure thing. If I can just add on to the previous question about the urban planning area agreement between the city and the county. Just to on the record that with our planning group that met 8 times to talk about the proposal, we did have Jessica Pels as part of that, who's a long-range planner for Washington County. And then in addition to that, we've been having conversations with county staff about the process and about those agreements and about when those changes happen. So that definitely is in the works.
Any other questions on the plan? All right, I'm gonna close the public hearing at 9:36. And again, this is going to be whatever motion in the form of a recommendation to city council to a date certain September 5th on file number CPA 23-05661. Right.
I'm not sure if this is a chair question or a staff question. Do we have to have a recommendation tonight or from nothing to open? That was one of our options.
It's always an option to approve, to deny, or to continue.
I'd like to open some discussion. We quite a bit of comments this evening about notification. And I will honestly say, when I was reading through our packet and the information the city had emailed, I kind of felt like it was contradicting to what was the newsletter and our water bill, as well as what was posted on the website, as only being able to comment on the amendments. Everything else was already approved. And so it was stated in one of the testimonies this evening that people felt like they couldn't comment because it was already a done deal. They were just adding additional goal 14. So it's of my opinion, I would just continue going open to see if there are additional comments with this clarification that the UDB was fully open for not just amendments.
I'll entertain that staff response to that question.
I don't know about individual people. I mean, I believe the city manager might have been involved in some of that, but any miscommunication, I think, was clarified fairly quickly. I see a head shaking. People saying it was. Okay.
Excuse me.
The other thing is, this is not the end of the line. In whatever recommendation you make, we start again and do this all over again at the city council. So there is still opportunity for people. We can clarify the city, we can clean up the city website, get word out. But because it is important for people to understand, they can address any of the issues, any UGB issue, you know, that's involved in this decision, or the housing analysis. And they will get a chance at the city council. I mean, ultimately, it's their decision, right?
Right, I just know in the past, city council has wanted us to solidify our opinions before we send these forward and not legally send, so. I don't know, we have a council member here this evening. We'd like to speak to him.
Ask at this time, again, going to hear this again. I want to give the public enough time, because September 5th is a shorter time for this, all the people out here and all our friends. Maybe we don't need to have it right away, give them enough time to, I don't know what that would be adequate, but what time do we need to give them, what would be adequate? You know, because the council's gonna have to hear this, and maybe they're gonna delay it too. I mean, I have no idea, I'm just one of 7. So I want to be, this is a big deal, I mean, this is huge,
So it's up to the planning commission. My only advice is that if you do want to continue this to hear additional public testimony, you'll have to reopen the record. And then make a decision about whether people who've already testified or should be allowed to testify again. How many bites of the apple?
If I may just add as well, I just pulled up because I'm not part of the writing the notice anymore, so I wanted to read what it said on the website. It actually doesn't indicate on the website that there was any noticing issue or any record previously. In the website on the planning commission meeting for this evening, it says that the notice is hereby given that the city is holding an open public hearing on North Plains Urban Growth Boundary Amendment and Comprehensive Plan Text Amendment and Housing Needs Analysis Update. It goes on to say, anyone is welcome to participate. There will be an opportunity during the public hearings to ask questions or provide testimony. The website does not have any indication that there's any limits to what can be testified upon. Well, the first paragraph where it says UGB amendment, the last sentence, this will not change the UGB area, the approved UGB area. So this makes it sound like the only thing you can testify on is the new information proposed this evening or in the Goal 14.
First paragraph.
There any other deliberation?
Is that on the, which paragraph is that? What does the paragraph start with? It starts with UGB and it's one that is for the evening's link for, oh no, excuse me, I'm looking at the urban growth boundary hearing, expansion update hearings. Okay, I'm looking at the planning commission meeting for tonight that you have to go to click to get to the meeting details. And I think the notice is different and not explicit. Language is what went out on our water. Gotcha, yeah, I do not receive. I don't know, that was just my comment at the session.
The comment. All right.
Hang on, I'll entertain a motion.
I move we recommend to the city council to approve ordinance 490. Amending the city
File number.
TPA 23-0562. I'm sorry, yes, 1. For the final US UGB expansion report. April 2023.
Date 30.
September 5th.
I'll second. Motion is for recommendation for approval to city council to a date certain on September the 5th for file number CPA 0561. Urban growth boundary 23 CBA 23-0561. Urban growth boundary expansion. All those in favor say aye. That's unanimous. That we will move on to item number 8 is new business. Staff, do we have new business?
Chair King, it might be good to just take like maybe 5 minutes, let people kind of stand up and stretch their legs and then see if anybody wants to stay and then come back. Maybe 3 minutes even is enough. Let's go.
All right, let's move on with finish this up and get out of here.
Yeah, let's wrap it up, boys.
Item number 8 is new business.
Second, you hit.
Really, the new business at this time is what you're working on right now. The current business is the new business. We don't have any new applications coming before you right now. We're still waiting to see if the excavation company is going to submit an application for their property over there next to the public works property there. We have heard that that still is in the work. Steel Electric, though, we haven't heard from in a while, so not sure what's happening with that property over there by McDonald's. They still have the for sale sign up there, but otherwise, nothing new beyond the testament we're working on in the UGB at this time.
Any unfinished business? Item 9.
Just the text amendment that we're working on. We don't have any other unfinished business.
Item number 10, we have the land use applications and city project monthly reports. Any questions or comments on those? Anybody still awake?
Is the sign permit for Cup of Joe sign on the building?
I'm sorry, what's that?
The sign Cup of Joe, is that a sign on the building?
A cup of yo.
Cup of Joe, yeah.
That was for the sign that's on the building right now. Yes.
Okay.
Probably an older one.
Yeah, so they did submit a sign permit application for that, and we did process it pretty quick because they had a deadline to try and open under, and so we worked with them to help get them out the door.
Any other questions? On item 10? Okay.
In terms of signage, the one sign we are still waiting to see changed out though is the space age signs. We've communicated with them. It's my understanding that some of the signage that was approved is on back order, and that's why they still have the temporary signs up. One other maybe update.
Yeah, that's what I was just saying. The tall one they're changing out today.
Oh, did they change? Okay. I haven't been down there yet. Been kind of stuck over here on this side of town all day.
Report, we've never gotten one, so. What happened to the improvements that we're gonna start this summer for Pacific? I thought they were gonna do a sidewalk project or something.
I can take this.
Yeah.
Yes, good question. We're sequencing a few projects together. We had so many sidewalk projects, portions of 313th on Pacific, Main Street, Commercial Street. Commercial Street's going to be one of the next one, kind of doing all these infill things that we approached, city engineer approached CWS to basically do a sort of a regional retention and detention facility in a portion of town. That took months to try to get through and sort through all of their hydraulic questions. So we finally got that approval just last week. So 313th is bid and awarded. Council just awarded that project a couple of days ago. So that's moving ahead. Then we'll get to commercial. Pacific's probably going to be early next year. Yeah.
And one other thing about public works, before I watch your ear.
Why is that report in there? I'm wondering. This was news to me.
Letters. Oh, my house. First time, it's the first house I've lived in that has a irrigation system and backflow. And I was a little bit puzzled because we were getting all these letters addressed to residents, which my husband's a mail carrier, so anything addressed resident goes in the recycle. It's not important. Little did I know, my neighbors started getting 3-day shut-off notices if you didn't have your backflow checked. I was a bit panicked because I hadn't gotten a notice and I was leaving town last week. So I'm just wondering if maybe the city should consider changing the process a little bit and actually address it to the water customer or the owner of the property or something rather than residents.
Sure, I'll make that suggestion to our operator. Yeah.
In a mailman's eyes, that is junk mail.
Hey, I come from 2 generations of mail carriers, and I respect your husband's decision there, I guess. Yeah, we'll note that. I'll just say Javier is getting his water distribution certificate, and he took on that project this year, did a phenomenal job. So we'll work with them on a better mail merge next year.
Wait,
It sounds like what, for you to say, you need to shut off.
Urgent, maybe at the bottom.
Never done it in 5 years. So
I think it's best practice to protect your water system to do it. Yeah.
Opting of, you know.
Often you have a customer.
Yeah.
Well, and then in that, my second source is like, well, how can they shut off my water? There's nowhere in my water agreement when I signed up, does it say my water can be shut off for a backflow? So I was all confused. But anyways, lost my train of thought. Oh, if he got his water certificate, does that mean that he would be approved backflow testing?
Anyone that takes the testing can be approved. You could be a backflow tester. It's just a course that you need to take. So I would love to see some local folks, you know, do some little local businesses to do it, because all Javier does is recommend that someone contact a tester to do the backflow testing. Yeah.
But they won't repairs, have a repair to be done to it. But the only reason I'm asking is because some jurisdictions like Salt Valley Water District,
Mhm.
they send out the notices, you have until this day. If you have not done it on that day, staff go out, staff
Yeah.
check it, and then it's attached to your next bill.
Yeah, it's
not like
debit.
shutting off your water.
It's a debit against your bill. Yes, this is it's a work in progress we'd like to do. You know, Blake was the only water certified operator that the city had for 20 years. So Javier is working up to that. We've already talked about improvements he'd like to make as he kind of works his way up through the water system, and that's one of them.
That's interesting about the tester. I just might volunteer to be the city tester. I'll go around and check them.
Said volunteer.
Charge and they're there for 10 seconds. It doesn't-
I had an irrigation company visit me yesterday, and I was like, oh, 150, thank you. You know,
Yeah.
1 minute.
That's all. Thank you.
Well, we're talking about public works, any update on when that turn lane on Glencoe to North Avenue might open?
Yeah, that, you know, Lennar is working on that with the county. So it's not a public works issue, as you know. And, you know, we've just been told that, it's kind of backlogged into Washington County's system. And they're just waiting for the approval of the plan. And what they're gonna do is, go back and grind out some of the existing, striping that you have on the north side of, North and Glencoe there. So Shady Brook side. And then they're gonna catch it where they can to bring it back and align it with the current turn lane. And so they're just waiting for Washington County to say, you're approved to do that.
Did they shut it down before they had approval to?
Well, I think what happened is, once they got the work done, it wasn't maybe understood initially that it was gonna offset the center line until the work was done. And then they realized, oh, shoot, we got a problem. And so they had to go back and work with the county to address that problem. And the county said, don't open the turn lane until we get the striping corrected.
That brings us into item number 11 is the planning commission comments. So the first thing is, have we talked about Washington County about putting a stop sign? Stopbound on Shady Brook?
I have made some initial contact with them about that, but I've not gotten a lot of feedback. People have been on some vacations and whatnot, and so I think I just need to get back in touch with them. Yes.
Will that become a four-way stop then?
I doubt they will. It's gonna be hard to get an additional stop sign, just based on the designation of that street. It's classified as a higher roadway. And so they tend to not want to put stoppage or driveways on those type of roadways to let the traffic flow. So I think getting one stop sign is going to be tough. Yeah, so we'll try and get one and then see if they're open for more, but I know that one is going to be a challenge just based on how the street is classified.
Yeah, I would be shocked, because if, you know, when you turn off of the highway on Glencoe south to Hillsborough, there's not a single. Well, I guess there's a couple stoplights. Yeah.
Lights.
Yeah, I guess there are. It's a pretty long stretch of arterial though. So I don't know. We'll see. That it was a challenge to get them to reduce the speed from 45 to 35 in that zone near West Ridge. So, I mean, the county, whatever. What more can I say? I love them. God love them.
Did you get it turned out? Did you get it reduced?
Yeah, they're a couple years ago. Yeah,
Okay.
they put a transition zone. Yeah.
The planning commission comments?
Andy's here. Whenever we had our last workshop, we've been talking about the sign code. The city has the URA properties, the one on Glencoe.
Mhm.
The sign is still, the business sign is still, it's in violation of the code.
In the old gas station.
Yeah.
Okay. We can get that removed. Yeah.
Is there gonna be any cleanup on it at all, or are you just waiting for a developer to buy it?
We're waiting for a.
Well, that's what I'm saying, it's,
We heard from Fulton that was fired.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say, it's all full of blackberries, so. Kind of a nuisance.
Yeah, we'll shell out a few $1,000s to clean it up, because there's no way our public works crew has the capacity to do that.
Just go rent some goats.
Warning notice.
I would love to. I would absolutely love to, but yeah.
Any other planning commission comments? Anything for city council? Does the city council have anything? for planning commission?
What is this, monkey, what is it?
Christine, speak no evil.
A lot to divulge, anything I'd have to hear this 4 times, but if I can join you, it's number 3. You know, I think it's number 3.
Don't forget the 20 years ago.
Yeah. So anyway, no, I have everything I got stuff to think about.
Okay, great. Item 12, any other staff comment?
Covered so much tonight. I tried to think of what we missed.
My only comment would just be enjoy the garlic festival and
Yep.
have a
Buy
good
some
time.
books, go to the garlic festival, eat a lot of garlic, enjoy the great food and music. Should be a good time. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be my first, so I'm super excited.
Okay. If there's no other planning commission business, our next regular meeting is September the 13th. Here, without, unless it's changed, but we're planning on a workshop at 6 o'clock, regular meeting at 7, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. No other business. We are adjourned at 10 o'clock.